Hey guys, tonight we venture back to a time when the only lights you'd see at dusk were the embers of last night's cooking fire and the faint glow of termite mounds heating beneath the African sky. You're standing at the base of a rocky hill, mist curling around your ankles like a curious cat, and if you're not careful you might slip on the slick stones. So watch your step, because unlike YouTube comments, gravity here is unforgiving. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me what city you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first step onto the plateau and feel the stones shift underfoot, remnants of walls that will one day grow into the largest ancient structure south of the Sahara. It's still the 11th century, though you're too busy marveling at the sunrise, pinks and golds spilling over distant copies, to notice the calendar. The air carries the scent of wild sage and ripening sorghum. Tiny gecko silhouettes skitter across the rock faces as you approach what will one day be the central ridge of Great Zimbabwe. You crouch to examine a fragment of pottery half buried in red soil. Its rim is simple but sturdy, fired at over 800 degrees Celsius in a pit, an impressive feat for an age when many communities still used only sun-dried clay. This is the handiwork of the early Shona farmers, mastering kiln techniques before they even raised their first dry stone wall. Mainstream scholars date these humble beginnings to around 1100 CE, when small groups began clearing thorn trees and planting millet and sorghum in terraces along the hill's slopes. It's peaceful here, but don't let that lull you into thinking life is easy. You haul water up from a nearby spring in a gourd, half your body weight in liquid regret, and slump against a boulder to catch your breath. You wipe sweat from your brow, no modern shade here, and admire the view. Villages of thatch roof huts spread below you like a sea of straw, each ringed by low wooden fences for livestock. You can't see Great Zimbabwe's iconic stone walls yet. Today, your community's boundary is a fence of branches and vines. By midday, you're back in the fields, digging planting holes with a wooden hoe carved from a fallen baobab branch. Tips passed down through generations tell you to mix crushed termite mounds into the soil. Ancient farmers discovered that the mounds, rich in minerals, boost crop yields dramatically. A quirky fact, archaeologists have found traces of snail shell ash mixed into these same soils, suggesting villagers burned shells to add calcium. A technique you'll still see used in modern organic gardening, minus the snails. As the sky darkens with clouds, you return to the ridge. A circle of elders has gathered around a small fire pit. Flames leap to life with a few twigs, and the orange glow dances across their weathered faces. You sit cross-legged on the cool stone, eyes on the fire, listening as they share stories about ancestors who first chose this rocky outcrop for its defensibility and spiritual resonance. They speak in low, rhythmic tones, pausing for each echo to settle. You trace your fingers along the rough surface of a fallen stone. It's not yet polished into the majestic walls you'll walk among centuries later, but you can almost feel the intention in the cut. Smooth, flat faces created by pecking at the rock with hammerstones. Historians are still debating whether these earliest blocks were laid for practical defense against rival clans or served purely ceremonial purposes around sacred springs. Night falls. You lie on a mat of woven grass, looking up at a sky so clear you swear you see the Milky Way forming a bridge to the horizon. The elders hum lullabies that reference the first rains and the promise of a bountiful harvest. You awaken before dawn, the sky still deep indigo, stars fading only in the east where a sliver of light hints at sunrise. As you sit up on your woven mat, you realize the air feels different today. Cooler, almost crisp, and a low mist still clings to the terraces below. You stretch, flexing muscles that ache from yesterday's work hauling clay and planting sorghum. But there's no time for complaints. Today you join your fellow settlers in shaping the first foundations of what will become a monumental legacy. You rise and step out of your hut, a simple wooden frame lashed together with strips of palm fiber, covered in woven grass mats. This is still very much the era of temporary dwellings, where the constant threat of termite invasion means you never quite trust the walls, or your neighbor's cooking fire, for that matter. Each morning, You reinforce weak spots with fresh reeds, humming a tune taught by your grandmother. It's a practical skill. Without sturdy homes, livestock wander off, and no one wants to chase escapee goats through thorn scrub before breakfast. By the time the horizon blushes with a pale pink light, the settlement has stirred fully awake. Children emerge, rubbing sleep from their eyes, darting between huts to fetch water in gourds. You join the adults at a communal trough carved into a fallen kopje, where clear spring water pools in a low basin. The spring is more than a water source. You've heard that your ancestors chose this hill for its sacred springs, believed to offer protection and prosperity. Mainstream archaeological consensus dates these earliest Shona farming hamlets to around 1100 to 1200 CE, when people from the Zimbabwe highlands began trialing new crops and pottery styles. You work alongside a small team felling thorn trees with stone axes, shaping rough timber to erect the frames for more permanent homes. Each frame is anchored in a trench dug with antler picks, a surprising choice of tool you only discovered when an elder explained that antler tines are both strong and biodegradable. It's a quirky fact that antler picks were prized enough to be traded across villages, long before gold and ivory made their way to the coast. Some households even prized decorated antler tools as status symbols, carving simple patterns into the bone. As the sun climbs higher, you take a moment to observe your neighbor's handiwork. To the north, a family tests a hybrid shelter, a round hut built with wooden poles plastered in a mixture of red clay and cow dung, its roof thatched with elephant grass. To the south, someone experiments with a low stone foundation, just a single row of local granite blocks laid without mortar. This is the earliest hint of stone construction, a modest attempt to prevent walls from rotting away, but still far from the towering dry stone walls you'll marvel at in centuries to come. By midday, the labor is punctuated by the call of a spotted eagle owl perched on an outcrop. You pause to share a handful of dried fish wrapped in banana leaves, an easy snack that travels well from the nearby river delta. Salted fish wasn't the only luxury. You've heard tales of cowrie shells occasionally arriving via trade, used both as currency and decorative beads. It's one of those obscure tidbits that makes you grin. These inland farming communities already understood the value of appearance and trade networks long before their stone walls impressed foreign visitors. After eating, you return to your frame, lashing reed bundles to the wooden poles with strips of leather made from goat hide. The work is repetitive but meditative. Your mind drifts to the stories you've heard of distant cities built on stone and mortar. Historians are still debating whether the early Shona builders learned these techniques from Swahili traders along the coast or developed them independently through trial and error. You wonder if centuries later someone will debate your humble reed and timber hut as proto-Stone Age architecture. In the afternoon heat, a breeze finally stirs, carrying the scent of flowering mopane trees. You and another settler climb onto the half-finished platform of a communal meeting house, squatting on rough timbers to hammer pegs in place. This house will be the heart of decision-making, where elders meet under a roof of thatch to discuss land allocation, marriage arrangements, and harvest festivals. It'll also double as a refuge during raids from neighboring clans, because, yes, territorial skirmishes were common, and defensive architecture eventually became part of settlement planning. By sunset, your hut frame stands proud against the darkening sky. It's a modest circle maybe 3 meters across, but you can picture the final plastered walls painted with red ochre patterns. As night falls, you help plaster the lower section of your new home, using a mix of clay, straw, and crushed snail shells. That unexpected ingredient, snail shell ash, serves as a natural binder, discovered when someone noticed abandoned shells near a fire pit and realized the calcium-rich residue made plaster adhere better. Few people outside this region know about that technique today, though it survives in some rural practices. Later, you gather around the same spring where you fetched water at dawn. How dramatically things have changed. Once this hill was ringed by thorn scrub and the occasional fig tree. Now it buzzes with human activity. Families store grain in small clay silos raised on stone pedestals to keep pests away. You run your hand over one silo's lid, smooth as river-polished pebbles. It's a subtle but significant advancement. Protecting the harvest means fewer lean years ahead, a practice that soon becomes widespread knowledge across the Shona lands. Around the communal fire, elders recount the origins of the settlement's name, though no one seems to agree on the exact translation. Some say it means rock houses, while others insist it refers to stone guardians. Historians and linguists today still debate the etymology of Zimbabwe, arguing whether its root words are Shona or derive from a now-lost dialect. You listen, intrigued by the idea that your descendants might one day study your words to piece together their own history. As midnight approaches, you settle beneath a large fig tree that casts shifting shadows in the flickering firelight. Nearby, sentries keep watch, just in case rival clans decide to test your new fortification. You wake before sunrise, the sky still a deep indigo bleeding into violet at the horizon. Ahead of you stands the first true sign that this place will one day be legendary. Walls of stone rising from the earth like ancient leviathans. You step closer, your heart thudding as you trace the contours of the lower courses. Rows of flat granite slabs stacked as mortar, held together by sheer weight and precision. The chill of dawn clings to your fingers as you touch the cool surface, marveling that hands like yours shaped these stones to fit so seamlessly. Walking along the base, you find the walls already towering above you by a full human height, nearly 2 meters, forming a protective enclosure for an inner courtyard. Each stone is beveled, its edges trimmed by hammerstones until the surfaces lie flush with their neighbors. A technique known centuries later on Mediterranean islands, but here, thousands of miles inland. You can almost hear the echoes of chiseling hammers in your mind, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap that shaped Great Zimbabwe's signature dry stone architecture. You run your palm along a seam so tight that not even a blade of grass can slip through. Mainstream history credits local masons with developing this dry stone technique around the 12th century, refining it over generations until their walls could reach heights of 5 meters and thicknesses of up to 2 meters at the base. It's the largest ancient stone structure in sub-Saharan Africa, a testament to engineering prowess in a pre-colonial kingdom that would astonish later travelers. But before these walls climbed so high, you imagine early builders first experimenting with cavities in termite mounds. Locals noticed that hardened mound soil formed natural bricks once the termites departed, inspiring them to peel away sections and use them as rudimentary bricks. It's a quirky origin story that archaeologists love to retell around campfires, though it's more legend than fact. Yet some experimental archaeologists have indeed heated termite bricks in hearth fires to test their strength, suggesting that early inhabitants may have adapted natural materials long before quarrying granite. You climb a gentle slope to reach the first course above ground. Stones lie in horizontal tiers, each row slightly set back from the one below, creating a batter that stabilizes the wall against wind and shifting soil. As you step up to the second tier, you notice stone chippings scattered like breadcrumbs, evidence of on-site dressing. Builders likely hauled rough blocks from quarries half a day's walk away, then dressed them here to final dimensions. The logistics of moving multi-ton slabs without beasts of burden is astonishing. You imagine dozens of porters toiling together, chanting to keep rhythm and ease the burden. A sudden breeze stirs, carrying the scent of wild sage and distant smoke. You pause to examine a stone that bears faint fossils of ancient marine creatures, proof that these highlands were once ocean floor. It's a bit of a mind-bender. As you stand among walls that you helped build, you realize the stones themselves predate human history by millions of years. That odd twist, a natural history cameo in human artifice, never fails to make you grin. Traversing a narrow passageway, you duck under a low lintel marking the entrance to what will become the king's private enclosure. The passage is so tight you brush shoulders with the wall on either side. You imagine this built-in constriction serving as a choke point in case of attack, defensive architecture at its finest. Yet historians are still debating whether these passages were meant primarily for defense or as symbolic thresholds marking the separation between commoners and elites. Inside the curved enclosure, you find a raised platform once topped with wooden posts and thatch, now a hollow ring of stones. This was likely the royal court where the king dispensed justice, oversaw rituals, and met foreign emissaries. Stand here at noon and watch sunlight slanting through the east-facing entrance, spotlighting the center of the court like a divine beacon. It's easy to imagine ambassadors from the Swahili coast kneeling here, presenting cowrie shells and ivory tusks. You crouch to inspect the masonry's smallest details, Some stones have small notches carved into their tops, perhaps for anchoring wooden beams or scaffolding. Others bear tiny drill holes, evidence that builders may have inserted wooden dowels to align blocks. These microengineering tricks reveal an understanding of load distribution and structural integrity not often credited to African kingdoms of the era. You pick at a notch, wondering what tool made that precise groove. As the sun climbs higher and warms the slabs, you join other laborers on a wooden scaffold lashed to the wall. You heft another slab into place, positioning it with practiced care. Building these walls is a communal endeavor. Men and women haul stones, mix soil and sand for packing between blocks, and chant songs to sync their efforts. Some say the rhythms were so infectious that they could carry a block twice as far with half the effort, a crude form of workplace morale booster. Up here, the landscape unfolds in all directions. You see the sprawling settlement below, its wooden huts a patchwork around the base of the hill. Beyond lies a savanna dotted with mopane and baobab, mammals stirring at waterholes far off. Great Zimbabwe's walls will eventually enclose more than just the royal precinct. They'll snake around a valley to encompass storage silos, workshops, and walled courtyards for cattle posts. But today, your focus is on perfecting this section. You pause for a midday break in the shade of the scaffold. A pot of millet porridge simmers over coals, fragrant with baobab fruit pulp. You dip a wooden spoon in and offer it to a fellow mason, swapping gossip about the elders' latest pronouncements on stone selection. They insist that only granite quarried from the southern ridge can be used here, because finer-grained stones resist weathering longer. It's a seemingly arbitrary rule, but one that may help explain why certain quarry sites bear more evidence of extraction than others. Back at the base of the wall, you find small piles of wasted flakes, chips produced when a block didn't quite meet the mason's exacting standards. Some of these flakes are nearly translucent, revealing the internal grain of the stone. You pocket a few as keepsakes. Later, you'll give them to your children as magic stones, said to bring resilience in school lessons. It's a charming tradition that persists. Families collect tiny masonry scraps as tokens of endurance and craftsmanship. By mid-afternoon, the wall you're working on has grown by nearly half a meter. You stand back to admire the profile. A gentle curve following the ridge's natural line, each tier set back just enough to create a graceful vertical sweep. This curvature wasn't just aesthetic. It helped divert wind loads and distributed weight around the circle. Decades from now, engineers will study these prehistoric curves for insights into gravity-fed design, long before modern civil engineering textbooks existed. As you descend from the scaffold, you overhear a pair of apprentices arguing over the orientation of a block. One insists it should align with a small fissure in the bedrock. The other says that would compromise the wall's continuity. Historians are still debating whether builders keyed their walls into natural rock outcrops for added stability or intentionally avoided fissures to prevent cracks propagating up the structure. Either way, the debate echoes through time, proof that even the simplest decisions leave scholars scratching their heads centuries later. Returning to ground level, you wander to a section where the wall has collapsed centuries hence, now a tumble of stones half reclaimed by grass. Among the rubble, you spot an animal footprint imprinted in the soil between courses. Perhaps a wild dog or hyena that padded through a gap when mortar-less stone walls still had gaps. It's a delightful quirk. Modern visitors stumble upon these prints and wonder whether ancient wildlife once used the walls as part of their territorial walks. As dusk approaches, you circle back to a stretch where the wall encloses a small courtyard. In the center stands a low platform that will one day hold a sacred fire pit. Today, you set a flame in a pit you dug yourself, adding a handful of sage leaves. The smoky tendrils curl between the stones, as though giving voice to ancestral spirits said to dwell within the masonry. Local lore insists these walls house the benevolent shades of past rulers, watching over the living from within the very rocks they laid. You settle against the inner face of the wall, feeling its residual heat and solidity. The cool evening breeze carries tales of other builders halfway across the continent, from the ziggurats of Nubia to the obelisks of Aksum. Yet here, on this plateau, indigenous hands forged structures unmatched in scale and technique. It's a point of pride and contention. Scholars still debate whether Great Zimbabwe's masons borrowed methods or innovated entirely on their own. Night falls and you light a small lamp carved from a hollow gourd, placing it at the base of a wall nook. Shadows leap across the stones, turning every crack into a potential doorway for hidden spirits. You lie back on your mat, listening as elders whisper legends of how each tier of stone corresponds to a stage of life, and that passing through each gate guided the soul toward enlightenment. Whether that's myth or encoded ritual remains a matter of debate among anthropologists, and you drift to sleep pondering which is truer. When you close your eyes, you feel the weight of the walls above you, not heavy in a crushing way, but comforting, like the embrace of a devoted guardian. You dream of a future when you rise to the sound of singing birds, golden-breasted sunbirds darting among mopane blossoms. Yet their cheerful chorus does little to prepare you for the scale of bustle awaiting you below. Today, the settlement you once knew as a scattering of huts has transformed into a thriving town pulsing with life and wealth. Traders in bright cloths from the coast jostle, with herders bearing cattle horns polished to a gleaming sheen, and everywhere you look there's the promise of prosperity. As you make your way down the winding stone path, you pass a series of cattle kraals ringed by stout dry stone walls, each enclosure holding dozens of oxen and cows whose hides ripple in the morning light. In Great Zimbabwe, cattle are more than livestock. They're currency, dowry, and measure of status. Mainstream historians estimate that by the 14th century, elite families here controlled herds numbering in the thousands, using them to negotiate marriages, settle disputes, and display wealth to visiting dignitaries. You pause to admire a particularly magnificent bull, its horns curving like worn ivory tusks, though you know ivory itself will come to rival cattle as a symbol of value. You continue past granaries raised on stone stilts, each loaf-shaped silo storing millet and sorghum for the dry season. These are communal reserves, but individual families maintain private bins, often decorated with geometric patterns rendered in red ochre. Quilted straw mats hang over entrances to keep out weevils, an ingenious pest control trick passed down since you were a child. Yet few realize that farmers also dust their grain with crushed snail shell ash to repel insects, a curious method that's been unmasked by archaeobotanists only in recent times. The clamor of voices draws you toward the market square, a broad, open courtyard paved in smooth stone slabs that glimmer when rainwater pools after summer storms. Here, merchants hawk their wares. Local pottery painted with chevrons and dots, leather sandals dyed with blackwood tannin, and trays of dried fish wrapped in banana leaves. But it's the precious goods that captivate your attention. Trays of small, glinting yellow nuggets, gold dust from rivers far to the east, and strings of ivory beads carved into delicate spiral shapes. You bite back a grin as you haggle for a single bead, joking to the seller that you're only decorating your hat and can't afford to finance a royal court. Your wry humor earns a chuckle, but he presses the bead into your palm, saying you'll need good luck for the storms coming this season. From here, you step into a shaded portico framed by thick granite pillars carved from single blocks. This is the great enclosure, the heart of Salisbury's reign, the local name Muin Mutapa's court, though you know later scholars will muddle both names and dates. Today it's your kingdom's living room, a gathering place where chiefs meet to discuss alliances, and where travelers present tribute. The walls here reach heights of 5 meters, concentric circles narrowing the space until you feel cocooned by rock. Sunlight filters through small slits, casting stripes of brightness across the packed earth floor. As midday heat bears down, you slip through an opening into the king's private courtyard. The air here is perfumed with smoke from a smoldering brazier loaded with savory herbs, mopane leaves, dried wild ginger, and a pinch of crushed saltpetre to keep mosquitoes at bay. This aromatic blend is part of the royal ritual, meant to purify the air and honor ancestral spirits before state audiences. Few people outside the palace know that the mash of herbs also doubles as a rudimentary insect repellent, an early form of holistic pest control that sometimes leaves visitors sneezing from the pungent fumes. You take a seat on a low stone bench carved into the courtyard wall. Across from you, an elephant tusk the size of a small tree trunk rests on carved supports. It's both trophy and offering, ivory sourced from great tuskers in distant forests, brought here by specialized hunters. The ivory trade with Swahili merchants is at its peak. By some estimates, Great Zimbabwe supplies up to 80% of the ivory reaching coastal markets at this time. Yet within scholarly circles, there's heated debate. Did local hunters supply ivory directly, or was much of it transshipped from kingdoms further north? Historians are still debating this question, since elephant remains found in local middens are surprisingly sparse compared to the volume of ivory artifacts recovered. After your audience at court, you wander toward the gold processing area. Here, women crouch beside shallow pits of water, swirling clay pans to separate heavy gold flakes from lighter sands. They hum rhythmic songs, their voices rising and falling like the swirl of water around their feet. You kneel beside them, learning the technique. Tilt the pan just so, use gentle circular motions, let the lighter sediment wash away. Feels meditative, like dancing with the river itself. An hushed note of debate passes among you. Some whisper that gold destined for export is alloyed with silver to stretch shipments, a theory still contested by numismatists centuries later. You rise from the gold-wash pits and skirt a line of small workshops where ivory carvers chip away at tusks with tiny chisels. Each master craftsman specializes in a motif. Spirals symbolizing the continuity of life, geometric designs denoting clan crests, animal figures recalling sacred totems. One oddity catches your eye. A carved elephant tusk fitted with a wooden mouthpiece, used not for adornment but as a crude horn in ceremonial processions. It's a quirky innovation not mentioned in most travel accounts, yet it endures in local lore as the voice of the ancestors. Mid-afternoon sun burns hot, so you retreat to a pavilion at the edge of the upper terrace. Here, cushioned mats invite traders to rest, and pools of clear water collected in stone basins offer relief for sun-scorched feet. You dip your toes in, feeling a surprising coolness. These basins tap into a hidden spring channel that keeps water flowing even during drought. Only a handful of elders know the exact location of the channel's entrance. They guard it jealously, believing the spring's purity is critical to the kingdom's well-being. As you sip from a gourd filled with fermented sorghum beer, an amber brew fizzing at the brim, you overhear a heated discussion among visiting envoys. They argue over the definition of wealth in this kingdom. Should it be measured in cattle, gold, or ivory? Some maintain that ivory trumps all because it travels better, while others contend that cattle remains the backbone of social order. Academic debates centuries later will mirror this very conversation, that same dilemma replayed in journals and dissertations. You finish your beer and stroll through a corridor lined with small niches. Each niche once held ceremonial vessels, clay pots painted with white kaolin, used in libation rituals to honor departed kings. Now only the stains remain, faint outlines of where vessels once nestled. Libation is a major aspect of court ceremony. You pour beer or milk into the earth, invoking ancestors to bless the harvest. Few visitors understand the symbolism behind pouring left to right, imbuing the ritual with cosmic order. Late afternoon shadows stretch long across the courtyard as you approach the livestock pens once more. Within one enclosure, a group of women skillfully sort cattle by age and color. Young calves sport ear tags made from carved ivory discs, marking their lineage. A practice some scholars argue began right here at peak prosperity, though others insist it originated in eastern coastal kingdoms and was adopted later. Today, you argue with your cousin over whether the tags should be painted red or black, but in the end you concede. Each color has its own protective magic, and you don't want young calves catching stray spells. As dusk descends, traders light torches and begin to pack goods for return journeys. You wander back toward the great enclosure, the walls now glowing gold in torchlight. Tonight, there will be a feast in the royal courtyard. Roasted game, spiced porridge, and copious beer. Drums will echo off stone, and dancers will whirl in colorful skirts, their ankles jingling with beads. You look forward to feasting and dancing, but also to listening for whispered plans of expansion. Talk of new herds to acquire, fresh trading partners to court. Under a canopy of stars, you settle on a cushion beside the roaring fire at court. The king raises his drinking horn in a solemn toast to the prosperity of the realm, and you drink deeply, the sweet tang of fermented grain warming your chest. You glance around at the stone walls encircling you, the coursed granite blocks that have risen so quickly in just a few generations. It's hard to believe that, not long ago, this was hollow ridgeline and thorn scrub. Now, it's a kingdom at its zenith. Cattle fattened on lush grass, rivers yielding gold, and ivory gleaming like carved moonlight. Everywhere you look, the signs of abundance surround you. Yet you know this era won't last forever. Even as you celebrate, you hear murmurs among elders warning of overreach, of stretched trade routes, depleted herds, and the fragile alliances that could shatter under strain. But tonight, you push those worries aside. You lean back against the warm stone, lulled by the crackle of fire and the rhythmic beat of drums. You close your eyes briefly, imagining the distant coast where dhows wait to whisk ivory. You rise before the sun cracks the horizon, the sky shifting from inky blue to pale rose as you shoulder your pack. Today you leave the familiar granite walls of Great Zimbabwe behind and step onto the ancient trade route that will carry you toward distant seas. The path is worn smooth by countless feet, carved into the red soil of the highlands and winding eastward through acacia-studded plains. You pull your woolen cloak tight against the morning chill, cracking a wry smile. Nothing says adventure like lugging your belongings across 50 miles of thorn and termite mound while still half asleep. As you descend the rocky ridge, you pass clusters of way stations, simple reed shelters where guides wait with eager porters. Each guide wears a broad-brimmed hat woven from palm fronds, a coastal innovation designed to shield against sun and sudden downpours. Porters, barefoot and nimble, balance woven baskets laden with gold dust and ivory beads on their heads. They greet you with soft murmurs in Swahili, Caribou, Asante. Though you know the lingua franca here blends Shona, Swahili, and snippets of Arabic loanwords. Mainstream scholars agree that by the 14th century, Great Zimbabwe was firmly tied into the Indian Ocean network, funneling precious commodities out and exotic goods in. You join a small caravan moving slowly through a valley hemmed by baobab giants. The bells of pack oxen jingle as they pull broad wooden sledges piled with clay pots painted in chalky white patterns. You inhale the earthy scent of crushed millet, knowing that these pots will fetch high prices on the coast for their distinctive Shona designs. A grizzled trader named Hamasai quips that your people's pottery is so reliable, coastal potters try to imitate your style in Zanzibar markets, though they can never quite match the clay's rich red hue. It's one of those delightful ironies. Inland artisans set coastal trends centuries before European porcelain arrived. At midday, you reach the ford of the Save River, its clear water tumbling over polished stones. Women squat on the banks, scrubbing indigo-dyed cloth in wide wooden basins. The indigo arrives in hefty cakes from kilns near Mombasa, traded inland via coastal caravans. You crouch beside them, helping rinse fabric in swirling circles. They laugh when you flinch at the cold rush, teasing that if you can't handle a river crossing, you'll never barter with Arabian merchants. A quirky note: archaeologists have uncovered charred coconut fragments in ancient middens here, evidence that coastal traders brought coconuts inland as far back as the 13th century, long before coconuts became ubiquitous symbols of tropical wealth. Refreshed, you follow the caravan along a rocky ridge where watchposts stand sentinel. By day, watchmen send messages with columns of smoke. By night, twin fires flicker like distant lanterns. You trade your own cowrie shells for a carved wooden token, a pass marking your safe passage through rival chiefdoms. Cowries, prized currency imported from the Maldives, clacks softly in your pouch. It's astonishing to consider that this humble shell once represented wealth equal to cattle in some villages, a fact that surprises even savvy historians today. Lunch is taken beneath the boughs of a mopane tree, its twisted branches offering scant shade. You unwrap a meal of dried fish wrapped in wilted banana leaves and nibble on hard millet cakes. Around you, traders discuss the next leg of the journey, a stretch known as the Thorn's Teeth, where acacia thorns grow so densely they pierce cloth and skin alike. They apply a paste of crushed baobab leaves and animal fat to ward off infection, a local remedy still used by rural communities today. You dab a bit onto a fresh scratch, marveling at how ancient knowledge persists. Soon you enter the dreaded Thorn's Teeth, where every step demands vigilance. Porters move gingerly, pressing robes tightly around their legs. You wield a hooked iron blade, an imported design from coastal blacksmiths, to snap branches aside. Your hands, though protected by leather gloves oiled with camel fat, sting with tiny cuts. You grit your teeth and press on, aware that this hazardous passage is what makes the goods you ferry so valuable. Few would brave this gauntlet for less than the promise of gold or ivory at journey's end. By late afternoon, the terrain opens onto rolling grasslands where the air shimmers with heat. In the distance, you glimpse the ghostly haze of the Indian Ocean, a pale blue line calling you forward. A hush falls over your group as you realize the coast lies still out of reach, yet tantalizingly close. Someone in the caravan murmurs about the coral stone city of Kilwa Kisiwani, where the Sultan's palace gleams under the sun. They say the walls there are plastered with lime imported from far-flung islands, a luxury you've only heard of in legend. That night, you camp beneath the open sky, the Milky Way arching overhead like a bridge between worlds. Traders guard their goods fiercely, tying up knives and beads in tent flaps. You gather around a crackling fire as Hamasai recounts tales of dhows slipping into harbor under moonlight, their sails billowing like ghost ships. You sip fermented sorghum beer from a carved gourd, the tangy liquid warming you against the chill and the excitement of reaching the coast. In the flickering firelight, you barter stories. You describe granite walls that snake around hilltops. They respond with accounts of coral mosques whose domes rise like pearls. Each tale cements the bond of commerce, both material and cultural, that threads your world to theirs. An academic debate simmers among your companions. Did Great Zimbabwe traders sail directly to distant ports, or did they rely entirely on Swahili intermediaries? Historians are still debating this question, weighing archaeological finds against travelers' chronicles. Before dawn, you break camp and push on, the horizon a pale promise of salt and sea breeze. The final stretch to the coast takes you through swamps fringed with papyrus and ancient mahogany groves. You stumble over submerged roots, your sandals heavy with mud. Each footstep squelches, a reminder that trade is as much about endurance as negotiation. Porters hum low chants to keep spirits high, voices melding with the croaks of frogs hidden among reeds. At midday, you crest a bluff and finally spy a distant band of mangroves, the unmistakable hallmark of the shoreline. A gasp ripples through the caravan as the smell of salt air drifts inland. You pause to let your eyes adjust, focusing on the gleam of wooden masts far below. Those dhows will be your ticket to the glittering markets of Kilwa, Mombasa, and perhaps even distant ports in Oman and Gujarat. You slip off your shoes, letting the cool grass soothe your blistered feet. The descent to the coast is steep and rocky, but anticipation lightens your load. You navigate narrow goat tracks over boulders until you sight the first cluster of coralstone huts perched above the tide. Swahili merchants in tunics of fine linen wave to you, beckoning to inspect their cargo. Long rows of earthenware jars brimming with frankincense and cloves stand in shaded alcoves. You're struck by the sensory overload. Spiced aromas, the slap of waves on coral, the chorus of gulls wheeling overhead. You step onto a wooden jetty that creaks under your weight, the wood bleached silver by sun and salt. Traders bustle, offloading goods from dhows and stacking them on sandy wharves. You present your Kaura token at a makeshift customs post, a raised plank marked with a painted line. A clerk tallies your ivory beads and gold dust on a slate tablet, quizzing you on the provenance of each item. You stammer out place names in Swahili and Shona, hoping for a fair exchange. Once customs clears you, you weave through narrow alleys between coralstone houses. Children chase chickens along sandy lanes, and merchants display colorful textiles dyed in indigo and madder. One vendor offers you a length of imported silk, whispering that it comes from the court of Delhi. You haggle over the price, joking that you only have millet cakes and a handful of cowries, but she laughs and sends you off with a scrap wrapped in palm leaf, saying it will make a fine kerchief for your next palace audience. Before sunset, you meet with an Arab dhow owner called Rashid, who invites you aboard to negotiate space for your return cargo. The deck groans under sacks of peppercorns, glass beads from Venice, and brass lamps bound for hinterland markets. Rashid sips sweet tea spiced with cardamom and ginger, offering you a taste. You find the combination strangely soothing after days of dusty travel. a small luxury that reminds you why this journey matters. As night falls, you help lash your crates to the deck under lantern light. The dhow's sails flutter as Rashid tests the rigging. You lean against the rail, listening to waves lapping against the hull, heart thrumming with the promise of passage across the Indian Ocean. Tomorrow, you'll set out with the monsoon winds at your back, riding currents charted by seafarers for centuries. You settle into a hammock below decks, the wood swaying gently. Traders around you whisper of storms that can appear without warning, of floating logs that can tear wooden hulls. You promise yourself to keep watch at the bow, scanning the horizon for shadows. But for now, you close your eyes to the creak of timbers and the rhythm of the sea. In your dreams, the ocean's sway transforms. You awake to the first pale fingers of dawn slipping between the gaps in your thatch roof. Even before you open your eyes, you smell smoke and the tang of fermented grain in the air. A gentle reminder that another day of ritual and routine is about to unfold. Stretching, you sit up on your woven mat and rub the sleep from your eyes. Outside, the courtyard's stone floor still holds the coolness of night, and thin wisps of smoke curl upward from clay lamps nestled in rock niches. You rise, careful not to disturb the sleeping huddle of your younger siblings on the other side of the hut, and step into the soft gray light just beyond your doorway. Barefoot, you cross the courtyard to the sacred fire pit, a ring of stones set into the ground, where embers from last night's offerings still glow faintly. You kneel to stir the ashes, adding a few sprigs of wild sage and a handful of crushed mopane leaves. The smoke hisses and coils, carrying smoke toward the north where the elders believe the ancestral spirits gather before sunrise. You cup your hands around the tiny flame and whisper an invocation, a simple prayer asking for clear skies and fruitful fields. This daily libation, offered at first light, is as essential as your morning porridge. It marks the start of each day in Great Zimbabwe, binding the living and the dead in a shared rhythm of respect and renewal. Historians recognize that Great Zimbabwe's inhabitants maintained ancestor veneration through fire rituals, believing the flames carried messages to those who passed before them. As the fire settles into a steady glow, you fetch water from the nearby spring in a hollowed ostrich eggshell, an ancient container prized for its durability and unique shape. Filling the shell, you pour a small stream of water into the fire pit, letting droplets hiss and vapor rise skyward. This simple act honors the water spirits and cleanses the space for the work ahead. A quirky local tradition holds that if you pour too much water and drown the embers, you risk offending a water nymph, so you learn early how to judge the perfect measure by eye. The nuance of that estimation becomes a point of pride. Only those who grew up beside these walls master the art of balancing flame and liquid without apology. With the morning's devotion complete, you slide over to the potter's workshop nestled under a grove of fig trees. The potters are already busy at hearth kills, stacking coils of red clay into bowls and jars that will serve both mundane and sacred purposes. You run your fingers along the ribs of a half-finished vessel, feeling the faint ridges left by your fingertips as you spiraled coil upon coil. Mainstream scholars note that Shona potters used coil building and pit firing techniques around the 13th century to produce durable wares, their distinctive chevron patterns imitated across the region. You smile at one apprentice who is sprinkling crushed snail shell ash into the clay, a centuries-old trick to strengthen walls and prevent cracking. This unusual additive gives your pots a subtle sparkle when sunlight glances off the rim, a little secret you guard jealously. A bell chimes in the distance, actually a cowrie shell tied to a length of leather that taps against a post when the breeze picks up, signaling mid-morning and the time to stoke the kiln. You add pine branches and bits of termite hill clay to control the temperature, watching the flames lick the inside until the kiln glows orange. The apprentices chant a rhythmic song to keep time, their voices rising and falling like the heat itself. You join in, your voice unsteady at first, but soon the chant settles into your chest like an old friend. Some academics still debate whether these kiln chants were purely functional, meant to coordinate work, or held hidden spiritual meaning, perhaps serving as offerings to the hearth spirit believed to oversee transformation. By midday, your stomach rumbles. You wander over to the communal hearth by the granaries, where women are stirring a thick porridge of millet and sorghum. The aroma of fermentation mingles with the sweet smell of roasted maize husks. You dip in a wooden ladle carved from hippo femur, a quirk of local craftsmanship that repurposes the bones of animals once hunted on the savannah. Legend says the hippo bone spoons grant strength to those who wield them, though realistically they were simply durable and readily available after a successful hunt. You laugh to yourself as you scoop a heavy spoonful, teasing a friend that you'll need all the hippo spoon power you can muster to finish your afternoon chores. Lunch becomes a small ceremony in itself. Before tasting a drop of porridge, you sprinkle a pinch onto the earth as a second offering to the ancestors, this time for gratitude over a full grain store. It's said that spirits, being creatures of refined taste, might sniff out a stale feast, so you always offer the freshest scoops. Amid bites of porridge, you overhear talk of tomorrow's rain ceremony, where a larger feast will be prepared, and select jars of sorghum beer poured into stone bowls for festival libations. Historians still debate whether the clan heads who preside over these feasts served purely ceremonial roles or actually managed agricultural policy in proto-state structures. You roll your eyes at the thought. Clan heads here are too busy feasting to worry about paperwork. After eating, you wander to the metalworking enclave on the far side of the settlement, where blacksmiths coax molten ore from small crucibles heated by fiercely burning charcoal. You perch on a low stone bench and watch sparks fly as the smith hammers out a simple awl. A lit ember from the forge drifts skyward, and you catch yourself wondering if that stray spark is another whispered message to the ancestors. A local gossip insists that blacksmiths here are more than mere craftsmen, that they're secret shamans with the power to transform earth into tools and talismans. Some scholars argue this was indeed the case, suggesting smiths occupied a special spiritual class. Others say this notion is a romantic overlay added by early collectors of oral histories. You chuckle at the scholarly back and forth. Whether they're sorcerers or sweaty laborers, these smiths are the only ones who can fix your broken hoe. In the late afternoon, the sun leans westward, and you head toward the great enclosure where the big feast awaits. Long tables of smooth stone have been cleared and swept. On them rest leaf plates heaped with roasted goat meat, stews flavored with wild ginger roots, and mounds of sugarcane, an exotic treat brought in by coastal traders. You fill a ceramic cup with pale cloudy beer and join dancers circling around a sacred fire. Their skirts flare like blossoming flowers, and you follow their steps, laughing when you misjudge a beat. Afterward, you recline against the cool stone and listen to flute and drum weaving melodies that feel as old as the hills themselves. As dusk deepens, you take part in the evening libation. A priestess pours a slender stream of beer and milk into a carved stone bowl, then tilts it to spill onto the earth. The liquid soaks into the ground, and you imagine it seeping through layers of rock to reach the veins of the ancestors below. Children sit nearby, mimicking her precise movements with small gourds, their imitation both playful and reverent. Quirkily, some kids think the spilled milk will cause wild grasses to sprout overnight as a reward from the spirits. You tuck a stray lock of hair behind your ear, smiling at their earnest belief. Night settles like a blanket, and you retreat to a grove of msasa trees where you join a small circle for bedtime storytelling. An elder describes how the first rains came when a humble farmer offered the last of his grain to the earth. The moral, generosity begets abundance, echoes softly as you lie back on a mat of woven grasses. Someone passes around an ostrich eggshell rattle, its gentle shake lulling you into a half-dream state. The rattler's beat mimics the fall of raindrops, and you drift between the tale and your own memories of pouring water into the morning fire. You wake hours later. You wake to a silence so thick that even the morning birds seem hesitant to sing. The air feels different, staler, heavier. As you step outside, you notice the once bustling courtyard lies deserted. A single faint trail of smoke spirals from the sacred fire pit, but no one is there to tend it. You pause, hand on your chest, wondering if this hush marks a new kind of ritual, one where the living quietly step away from the place they once cherished. You wander through the empty huts, expecting children's laughter or the clatter of pots, but find only dusty floors and straw mats folded neatly in corners. One by one, the homes you helped build sit vacant, doors swinging on cracked hinges. Livestock kraals stand half-filled, gates ajar, as if the keepers merely forgot to latch them. You call out, "Hello!" Your voice echoes off the stone walls, unsettling in its loneliness. By mid-morning, you realize the settlement's heart has stilled. Where families once gathered for porridge beneath fig trees, you find bowls half empty, porridge dried into crusts. The granaries hold grain, but no one is left to mill and bake. You stand beneath the great enclosure's towering walls, tracing your fingertips along the cool granite, and feel an ache as if the stones themselves mourn. Historians date these emptying events to around the mid-15th century, when Great Zimbabwe's population steadily declined until the city was almost entirely abandoned. Looking across the broad courtyards, you spot small piles of personal belongings. Clay pots stacked near doorways, arrowheads laid out on flat stones, lengths of braided hide coiled beside empty gourds. It seems no one rose to cart these precious items away. A quirky detail catches your eye. A single ostrich eggshell bead, painted with a spiral motif, left perched on the lintel of a doorway. You touch it gently and imagine children whispering hopes for their future as they fasten such beads to necklaces. Now even those tokens of optimism lie behind silent walls. You search for evidence of struggle, fallen beams, scorch marks, but find none. The absence of widespread destruction suggests that Great Zimbabwe's departure wasn't the result of war or invasion. Instead, you discover more subtle signs. Eroded pathways overgrown with grass, collapsed reeds in former shelters, tiny saplings poking through cracks in the stonework. It's as though the land quietly reclaimed what people had shaped, seeping back under the walls like water into sand. Stepping into the king's private courtyard, you notice something new. The sacred fire pit, once aglow at dawn, sits cold and empty. The mortar-less stones around it bear fragments of ash and unspent sage leaves. You kneel to inspect them, no footprints, no signs of hurried departure. You imagine the priests simply walked away, carrying their sacred tools in baskets, leaving behind only the fading embers of memory. As you climb the gently battering wall's inner slope, you glimpse the distant horizon where parched fields meet the sky. Local legends speak of a great drought that lasted decades. Dendrochronologists and paleoclimatologists have confirmed a megadrought in the late 15th century, when rainfall dropped precipitously across southern Africa. Crops failed, waterholes dried, and people faced impossible choices: stay and starve or leave in search of greener pastures. You remember the wells you once tended, now choked with sediment, a silent testament to nature's shifting temper. In the fields below, you find half-finished terraces, stone retaining walls built to hold soil for planting, now crumbling. Once these terraces yielded millet and sorghum for generations. Now they are too fragile to farm. Amid the ruins, you spot an unusual adaptation. Fragments of woven palm fiber mats pressed into eroded soil to slow water runoff. Archaeologists later uncover these mats in excavations and marvel at the settlers' ingenuity, deploying biodegradable erosion control that modern farmers only recently rediscovered. You press on toward the outer enclosures, passing granaries braced with wooden posts. The wood has rotted, leaving stone cylinders teetering. You circle a grain silo and spot tiny shells of freshwater snails scattered at its base. Snail remains once mixed into plaster long ago are now cast out by nature's slow decay. That detail fascinates you. In life, villagers used snail shell ash to strengthen plaster. In death, the snails return to the earth, becoming part of the cycle they once bolstered. Following a narrow path that hugs the wall's underside, you find the communal meeting house, its timber frame collapsed into a tangle of decayed beams. You step gingerly among the rusted nails and broken reed mats. In better days, elders convened here to settle disputes and share harvest fortunes. Now the benches lie overturned, as if the last gathering ended in a sudden hush. Was this where the final vote to depart was cast? Historians still debate whether the abandonment was a single orchestrated exodus or a gradual trickle over decades. You move toward the cattle kraals, where wooden fences once held herds numbering in the thousands. Only a few bleached bones remain, gnawed by scavengers. It seems livestock kept pace with people, herded away to pastures still alive with grass. A lone ox skull rests beside a gatepost, hollow eye sockets gazing toward empty fields. You cannot tell if the skull was left behind inadvertently or deliberately placed as a ritual marker. Theories diverge. Some scholars argue the skull served as a symbolic closure of property rights, while others see it as a discarded relic of bygone wealth. In one of the inner courtyards, you stumble upon a half-buried pit filled with broken pottery shards. A child's handprint in clay emerges distinctly on one shard, an imprint left when a pot collapsed in the kiln. You trace the fingerprint gently, imagining the small potter who marveled at her work. It's an intimate, haunting reminder that ordinary lives once thrived here. Strange to think that this child's everyday play is one of the few personal touches to survive centuries of silence. As you ascend to the highest point of the great enclosure, you gaze across the ring of walls to the vast savanna beyond. It stretches in every direction, undulating as if breathing. You imagine the exodus. Families carrying gourds and bundles, departing at dawn toward unknown destinations. Some probably followed river valleys to the northeast, others drifted toward emerging kingdoms in present-day Zambia or Mozambique. Few returned, and those who did spoke only in whispers of a stone city abandoned like a dream upon waking. Night falls, casting long shadows across the empty stones. You light a small lamp from a fallen beam of your own hut, setting it at the entrance of the king's courtyard. Its flickering glow seems a lonely vigil, a single heartbeat in a sleeping giant. You wonder whether any of your kin remain in the distant lands where you will roam, or if they too chose oblivion over the weight of empty walls. Before sleep claims you, you circle the inner wall, placing small mementos at intervals. A carved ivory bead here, a scrap of textile there, an ostrich eggshell disc beside a post. It's your private ritual, a miniature offering to both ancestors who stayed and those who left. You whisper a hope that one day, someone will find these tokens and piece together the story of lives lived in this place of stone. Lulled by the hush, you settle beneath the stars, leaning your head against the cool granite. Somewhere beyond the walls, the world, you press your machete into the thick tangle of wild grapevines, each slash revealing mottled granite laid bare under centuries of green. Morning light filters through a canopy of fever trees, casting dappled patterns on the weathered stones. You pause, wiping sweat from your brow, and whisper to yourself, "So this is the legendary city of stone." Around you, the air hums with insect life and the distant call of a lilac-breasted roller, a reminder that the jungle hasn't forgotten this place. Your guide, an elderly local whose name you never quite catch amid the crackle of underbrush, nods toward a clearing. There, the walls rise in ghostly silhouette, massive curves of granite, mortared not at all but stacked with jaw-dropping precision. You remember reading the accounts back in your homeland, the ones by Karl Mach, the German explorer who first blazed a trail here in 1871. Mach was certain he'd found King Solomon's mines, a theory so persistent that it shaped European attitudes toward southern Africa for decades. Mainstream histories credit Mach's fevered journal entries with the discovery of Great Zimbabwe, even though local communities had known of these ruins for centuries. Stepping forward, you brush aside a curtain of creeper vines to reveal a portion of wall 2 meters high. The granite blocks are trapezoidal, each course gently tapering inward, evidence that their builders understood structural stability long before Western engineers mapped out such principles. You trace the edge of one slab with your fingertips, feeling the faint grooves left by hammerstones. This drystone technique is the heart of Great Zimbabwe's architectural fame. Walls that stand tall without mortar, resisting earthquakes and erosion. It's a skill that inspired awe in early visitors and remains a marvel in engineering textbooks today. But before Mach's tents and makeshift camps arrived, indigenous hunters and herders had always known these stones. Oral traditions speak of spirit guardians dwelling among the walls, and once you set foot in the central courtyard, you almost expect to see shimmering figures drifting between columns. In fact, some villagers still leave maize offerings at small alcoves carved into the wall's base, an unbroken thread of reverence tying present to past. Such practices were noted by 19th-century missionaries, though most of their reports were dismissed as superstition by Victorian scholars who preferred biblical parallels over African spirituality. You crouch beside a moss-covered lintel and rummage through loose soil with a small brush. Something glints among the dirt, a fragment of pottery edged with white chevron patterns. You hold it up, realizing its age might stretch back to the city's heyday in the 14th century. Mainstream archaeology places Great Zimbabwe's peak between 1250 and 1450 CE, fueled by prosperous trade in gold, ivory, and cattle. Yet even that timeline isn't set in stone. Historians are still debating whether the site's heart was built in a rapid burst of activity or grew gradually over 3 centuries of incremental expansion. You wander down a narrow passage carved into the granite, part of what later explorers dubbed the King's Trail. Legend says Solomon himself walked here, but you know that theory has been thoroughly debunked. Even today, some fringe writers argue for Phoenician or Arab architects, ignoring overwhelming evidence linking the walls to the Shona peoples. It's one of those academic debates that never quite dies. Outsiders desperate for exotic origins versus scholars who insist on indigenous innovation. You grin, thinking the walls themselves must shake at such arguments. As midday heat builds, you join a small team led by a tall, spectacled man introducing himself as Professor James Bent. He's a son of the famous explorer Theodore Bent and has come to document the site properly, drawing detailed sketches and measuring every block. You watch him set a wooden frame around a niche, holding a charcoal stick to trace its outline. He explains that this great enclosure is unique in African archaeology. A concentric ring of walls enclosing a courtyard nearly 100 feet across. Few pre-industrial societies built such grand, ceremonial spaces without mortar. Next, you follow Bent to a nearby mound where he excavates a shallow trench. Using trowels and paintbrushes, he uncovers charred cow bone and fragments of glass beads, thought to be imports from Persia. You stare in fascination, imagining caravans of camels and donkeys carrying these precious trinkets across the savannah to land on your king's table. Yet the provenance of these beads remains contested. Some chemists argue they arrived centuries later via Portuguese traders, but others counter that similar beads were already circulating by the late 14th century, carried by Swahili merchants. Scholars are still debating the exact date and route of that trade. Beneath the mound, Bent's assistant finds a circular post hole filled with hardened termite soil. It once held a wooden pillar that supported a thatched roof for ritual gatherings. You scoop out a sample and remark at the ingenuity. Termite mound clay, once deserted by its tiny architects, repurposed by humans into building blocks. Experimental archaeologists have since tested termite bricks fired in hearths, finding them nearly as durable as sun-baked mud bricks. A quirky adaptation that speaks to local mastery of materials. In the late afternoon, you accompany Bent's party to the inner sanctum of the great enclosure. Their walls rise up to 5 meters, stone courses perfectly horizontal. Small slits cut into the walls funnel breeze into the chamber, acting like a rudimentary air conditioning system. You lean into one slot and feel a rush of cool air, surprising your companions. It's a feature too practical and too precise to be accidental. British archaeologist David Randall Mackie-Vere would later document these vents in 1905 to 2006, praising their builders for combining form with function. Speaking of Randall Mackie-Vere, you watch as he unrolls a waterproof map across a flat stone surface, marking areas still unexcavated. He's the first to apply systematic stratigraphy here, insisting that layers of soil and debris can reveal the sequence of construction. Yet even his meticulous methods sparked debate. Some archaeologists claimed he disturbed sacred ground, while others hailed him as the pioneer of African archaeology. Historians still debate the ethics of those early digs. Were they genuine scientific pursuits or thinly veiled treasure hunts? You step back from the map and follow Randall Mackie-Vere toward a smaller enclosure perched above the great enclosure. There, he points out a cluster of storage pits, dome-shaped cavities lined with stone slabs, once sealed with timber and clay. The metal tools they uncover in these pits include copper rings and iron sickles, each smoothed by use and polished by time. You pick one up, surprised by its heft, and imagine farmers scything down sorghum stalks centuries ago, the glint of metal flashing under the African sun. As dusk approaches, you wander through a section where vegetation has reclaimed the walls entirely. Huge fig roots snake between stones, splitting seams and toppling courses. You wonder whether to clip them away or let nature tell its own story. Bent's diaries mention how explorers used axes to cut back roots just enough to reveal stone, then let the vines regrow, as a living curtain to remind visitors of the site's wild soul. It's a romantic notion, though modern conservationists balk at letting roots damage fragile masonry. Historians are still debating whether to prioritize authenticity or preservation. Near the perimeter, you discover a weathered milestone engraved with the faint remains of Arabic script, probably a boundary marker installed by Swahili traders to demarcate trade zones. You wipe it clean with a cloth and squint at the inscription, an intriguing link between inland power and coastal networks. Yet translators disagree on the exact wording. Some read it as a diplomatic message of friendship. Others insist it simply notes the date of passage. Scholars remain divided, poring over faded letters and debating the nuances of medieval Arabic in East Africa. You close out your day by scaling a small copy on the site's outskirts. From this vantage, you see the full sweep of walls like ripples frozen in stone. Below, the modern village of Masvingo has sprung up, blending tin-roofed huts with government buildings. Colonial officials erected a rail line nearby in the early 20th century to ferry tourists and artifacts away, igniting a debate that still rages. Should Great Zimbabwe serve national pride or foreign curiosity? Nationalists argue it's the cradle of their civilization. Tour operators counter that international visitors bring vital revenue. As night falls, you join a small campfire where Bent and Randall McIver share a dram of brandy. They toast the first proper survey of the site, but you can almost hear the walls whisper back at them. We were here before you, and we will outlast your maps. You notice Randall McIver glance uneasily at the dancing flames, as if pondering whether firelight can ever reveal all the secrets hidden in granite. Before bedding down under a canvas awning, you walk once more through the moonlit courtyards. The walls glow silver in the lantern's glow, and the sounds of nocturnal creatures fill the air. You stand in silence for a long moment, picturing the peasant families and royal courts that faded from these stones centuries ago. Then the European explorers who rediscovered them. The layers of history fold. You arrive at the site one humid morning to find a new kind of bustle. Not the rhythmic chant of masons or the low murmur of traders, but the deliberate clack of camera shutters and the scratch of pencil on paper. Heavy-booted men in khaki stand atop collapsed walls, peering through brass instruments that reveal nothing of spirit or memory, only angles and measurements. You steady your camera-slung shoulder and step forward, determined to witness how outsiders interpret these stones you know too well. The leader of this expedition is a British officer turned amateur archaeologist, convinced the walls rise not from local ingenuity but from a forgotten civilization of white Phoenicians or Jewish refugees of Solomon's era. He brandishes a leather-bound notebook filled with blocky script. These megaliths, he writes, bear no resemblance to any known African architecture. Mainstream historians today note that early 20th century colonial scholars often denied indigenous capabilities when confronted with monumental stonework, preferring to credit mysterious foreigners rather than recognize local craftsmanship. You roam the great enclosure's concentric walls, watching the officer frown at the dry stone technique you helped develop in your mind's eye. He points at a seam and declares it incoherent with any sub-Saharan tradition. You bite back a wry smile. The very techniques he dismisses, you've studied them since childhood. How each granite block is trimmed with hammerstones, how the batter stabilizes the curve, how natural rock outcrops are integrated seamlessly into constructed walls. Yet he chalks it up to Phoenician genius, even though early travelers recorded that local Shona villagers called the place Zimba Za Mabwe, houses of stone. As dusk falls, you join the colonial team around a flickering lantern. They pass around a crudely sketched map labeling sections as Royal Enclosure, Temple of Solomon, and Altars de Moises, oblivious to the oral histories insisting these were court precincts, grain stores, and ritual fire pits. A Portuguese missionary in the group remarks how he once heard villagers admit no knowledge of the wall's origins. Proof, he says, that the builders are long gone, unlike these intrusive foreigners now unearthing their secrets. You stifle a sigh. Historians are still debating how much local memory was suppressed under colonial rule, and whether villagers were coerced into silence or genuinely confused by the newcomer's authority. Over the next weeks, The expedition clears brush around the perimeter and erects scaffolding against the tallest walls. You wander among rusting nails and wooden planks, remembering when elders used small fires and smoke signals here, not lanterns and crosshairs. Near the western gate, the officer's assistant unearths a cache of arrowheads and small pottery shards. A small group argues that these relics were left behind by primitive tribes and not connected to the grand walls. You kneel and handle a shard painted with white chevrons, the same motif your potters still use. The assistant recoils, insisting that design is coincidental. One afternoon, you slip away to the local village, where elders gather in a low thatched pavilion to protest the removal of artifacts. They chant in Shona, invoking ancestors who watch over these hills. The colonial architect shows little interest, telling them politely but firmly that scientific heritage must be preserved in London museums for all humanity. You catch a glimpse of tears in the elder's eyes, grief not for lost objects, but for a stolen legacy. A quirky footnote. Some villagers later smuggled tiny snail shell beads out in their cloaks to leave a secret record of ownership, hiding them in padlocked trunks shipped abroad. At night, you pore over published accounts by the expedition's leader. His book features black and white photos of tumble-down walls captioned "Mysteries of the Dark Continent," and pages of speculative lineage tracing the stones back to Mediterranean empires. Colonial-era anthropologists praised these theories for fitting their narrative of African incapacity. Yet later research dismantles these claims, demonstrating through radiocarbon dating and linguistic analysis that construction began around 1100 CE by ancestral Shona communities. Historians are still debating whether the colonial misattribution was a deliberate strategy to undermine local pride or a genuine misunderstanding fueled by racism. You return to the ruins at dawn on the day the British flag is raised on a hastily constructed pole beside the great enclosure. Soldiers stand at attention, eyes fixed on the tattered banner, as the expedition leader announces the site belongs now to the crown. The ceremony feels grotesquely theatrical. A handful of uniformed men claiming ownership over stones shaped by generations of farmers and masons. You steady your breath, recalling how elders once draped animal hides over these walls to perform rain rituals, now replaced by printed proclamations and stamped deeds. Furious whispers spread through the village that afternoon. One elder declares the flag an insult to the spirits. Another warns the people to stay away from the flagged area lest they anger the ancestors. Locals begin to paint symbolic X's on the walls using red ochre, a silent protest marking the site as theirs. This form of cultural resistance goes largely unrecorded in colonial documents but survives in oral tradition, an obscure act of defiance that few scholars have acknowledged. Weeks later, the colonial team packs crates of stone artifacts and ivory objects onto ox-drawn wagons bound for the railway station. As the wagons rattle past, you dash forward and plant a handmade banner of woven reeds, proudly displaying the words, Zimbabwe, in bold script. The soldiers glance at you but do nothing. The elders smile quietly from a distance, their faith in silent action unshaken. This moment won't appear in any official report, yet you file it away in your own memory as proof that ownership isn't defined by curses or flags, but by deep, lived connection. Back at the expedition's camp, you overhear heated arguments over the proper interpretation of pottery shards. One scholar insists they are ornamental only, likely used in coastal bazaars, while another argues they form an integral part of local ritual, evidence of a sophisticated belief system no less complex than any in Europe. You lean in, catching the phrase, "I refuse to accept that tribal societies had symbolic art." You shake your head, thinking of the chevron patterns pulsing across countless clay vessels, each telling a story of lineage, ancestry, and place. When the team finally departs, you stand at the crest of a low hill and watch wagons grown away, loaded with pieces of your history. You run your fingers along a fallen lintel, feeling the grain of quartz and feldspar beneath your palm. The stones themselves hold fast, refusing to leave, even as knowledge of their meaning has been commandeered and distorted. You resolve to safeguard those stories, to teach visitors that these walls speak not of Minoan sailors or Jewish exiles, but of your ancestors' hands guided by generations of experience. In the years that follow, nationalist movements begin to reclaim Great Zimbabwe. Local scholars unearth fragmentary diaries and letters from the colonial era, exposing biases and mangled theories. Museums start repatriating stolen artifacts, guided by legal battles and shifting attitudes toward cultural ownership. Yet debates persist. Should the site be curated for tourism or reserved solely for descendants? Some academics argue that commercialization risks distortion, while others maintain that revenue funds conservation. Historians are still debating the balance between access and preservation. You visit the site decades later, finding a flagpole replaced by the Zimbabwean banner, walls swept clear of brush, and interpretive panels presenting a new narrative. You read in second person. You stand on the shoulders of 100 generations, and nod. This time the words ring true. A small plaque credits the elders who refused to remain silent, recognizing that oral history is as essential as carbon dates. Yet you also find traces of the colonial myths, buried in forgotten footnotes, reminding you that history is never fully exorcised of prejudice. As dusk falls, you light a small offering of sage and place it at the foot of the restored fire pit. You whisper an apology to the ancestors for the centuries of misconception, and gratitude for their silent endurance. The stones absorb your words, just as they have absorbed every footstep, every hammer strike, every denial and reclamation. You lie down beneath a canopy of stars on a cleared patch of courtyard, the walls rising like silent sentinels around you. The night is alive with crickets and the distant call of serval cats. You close your eyes, comforted by the knowledge that truth, like these stones, cannot be uprooted. No matter how many flags are raised, journals published, or artifacts carted away. You step onto the sun-warmed stones of Great Zimbabwe with fresh eyes, aware that what you see today is as much a product of modern storytellers as it is of medieval artisans. For centuries, these walls were narrated by outsiders, from Karl Marx's fevered Solomon's Mines, fables to colonial-era scholars dismissing African ingenuity. But in the decades following Zimbabwe's independence in 1980, a new generation of historians, archaeologists, and community leaders began to reclaim the narrative. You feel their energy as you wander. Each crushed granite slab seems to vibrate with the echoes of lectures, debates, and ceremonies meant to restore the site's true origins. Mainstream scholarship credits Zimbabwean archaeologist Peter Garlake with some of the first systematic challenges to colonial myths in the 1970s. Trained at the University of London, Garlake returned home convinced that these walls were built by ancestral Shona people, not Phoenicians or Israelites. He mapped the site's sequence of construction using careful stratigraphic excavation, demonstrating regular patterns of local pottery styles and radiocarbon-dated charcoal layers from 11th to 15th century hearths. His findings, published in the landmark 1973 monograph Great Zimbabwe, The Architecture and History of a Southern African Ruin, laid the groundwork for rewriting the colonial narrative. Yet not everyone embraced his conclusions. Some critics accused Garlake of nationalist bias, arguing he overstated indigenous innovation to support the new government's cultural agenda. Historians are still debating whether his interpretations underplay the influence of contemporaneous kingdoms like Mapungubwe, which some argue predate and may have influenced Zimbabwean techniques, rather than vice versa. Building on Garlake's work, Dr. David Beach and Dr. Thomas Huffman refined the site's chronology and social context in the 1980s and 90s. Beach focused on artifact analysis, correlating regional ceramic styles with settlement patterns, while Huffman used paleo-environmental data to show how changing rainfall influenced construction phases. They argued that Great Zimbabwe evolved in three major building periods, from early enclosures around 1100 CE to peak expansions in the 14th century, followed by contraction in the 15th century. Yet their models sparked heated debate. Some scholars suggest the intermediate phase was much shorter, perhaps only a few decades, implying a rapid surge of monument building fueled by a political centralization unknown elsewhere in southern Africa. Others believe the decline was not due to environmental stress alone, but also to political fragmentation as northern provinces broke away to form rival states. Historians remain divided over the relative impact of climate change versus internal power struggles on Great Zimbabwe's fortunes. Among the most powerful voices in rewriting the narrative were local oral historians and elders whose memories had been sidelined for generations. You meet one such elder as you clear brush from a collapsed lintel. She sings a song in Shona that names ancestors by the very stones they laid, each verse marking a lineage of master masons. In the 1980s, communities around Masvingo began organizing Zimbabwe revival ceremonies, reenacting foundation rituals and honoring the bira of the ancestors. A musical festival now held annually on the outskirts of the ruins. A quirky detail: during one revival in 1992, villagers discovered a cache of small beetle shell beads hidden beneath the central platform, an offering left by ancestors to ensure the stone spirit's protection. Archaeologists later carbon-dated the resin binding the beads to the 14th century, corroborating oral claims. These community-driven discoveries challenged the primacy of Western excavation and underscored the value of living traditions in interpreting the past. UNESCO's designation of Great Zimbabwe as a World Heritage Site in 1986 marked another turning point in narrative control. Acknowledging exceptional testimony to a vanished civilization, the UNESCO listing required Zimbabwe's government to lead preservation efforts and educational programs. You visit a recently restored watchtower where interpretive panels replace colonial-era labels like temple and palace with royal enclosure and ceremonial courtyard, emphasizing functions grounded in Shona cosmology. Yet restoration methods themselves remain contested. Some conservators argue for anastylosis, reassembling fallen blocks to approximate original form, while others insist any reconstruction risks falsifying history. Historians and preservationists debate whether to leave stones in their weathered collapse as testimony to time's passage, or to restore upright walls to recapture the site's monumental scale. Today, conversations around artifact repatriation further shape the narrative. Museums in Europe and North America still hold hundreds of pottery shards, soapstone birds, and ivory artifacts from early 20th century excavations. You join a symposium where Zimbabwean delegates press for permanent return of these objects, asserting that narrative ownership cannot coexist with physical displacement. Representatives from the British Museum and South African galleries respond that international loans and joint exhibitions help globalize knowledge of Great Zimbabwe. This tug-of-war reflects a broader academic debate over whether tangible heritage should be centralized for study and tourism or dispersed to reunite objects with descendant communities. Historians continue to debate if shared global curation dilutes cultural identity or fosters inclusive storytelling. Walking through the reburied stone paths, you encounter university students documenting graffiti-like ancient carvings hidden beneath lichen. They are part of a youth-led initiative to record invisible heritage, stories told in whispers by grandparents about secret subterranean passages linking the great enclosure to distant hills. No archaeological evidence yet confirms those tunnels, but the narratives persist, and scholars argue over their mythic versus literal basis. Meanwhile, a group of craftswomen in a nearby village revives the art of constructing miniature drystone models as teaching tools, an obscure practice dormant since the 16th century. Their tiny replicas, complete with scaled walls and gates, bring younger generations into the fold of heritage preservation. As the sun dips toward the horizon, you pause atop the second wall and survey the shifting light across the rings of granite. The voices of colonial-era misinterpretation recede, replaced by a chorus of local experts, community storytellers, and global scholars in conversation. You recognize that rewriting the narrative is not a final act but an ongoing dialogue, one that balances scientific rigor with living memory, structural preservation. You arrive at Great Zimbabwe just before sunrise, the eastern sky a pale wash of lavender and rose. In the half-light, the walls stand like colossal sentinels guarding centuries of memory. But today, you're not alone. A team of heritage conservators gathers at the base of the great enclosure, their hands deftly wielding brushes, wooden paddles, and burlap sacks. You've come to witness and participate in the ongoing efforts to safeguard this ancient marvel for future generations. As light seeps into the courtyard, you meet the lead conservator, a Zimbabwean woman named Thandayo. She wears a wide-brimmed hat to shield her from the sun and carries a vest pocketing small vials of consolidant, an eco-friendly lime wash used to stabilize crumbling mortar-less seams. She greets you with a warm, knowing smile, as though aware that you, too, have a stake in these stones' survival. Under her guidance, you will join the Stone Guardians, a volunteer corps formed in 2010 to support the national monuments and museums of Zimbabwe. Your first task is to assess wall stability. Thandai hands you a wooden mallet and a soft cushioned pad. Knock gently, she instructs, and listen for hollows beneath the surface. You tap a section of the inner wall, and the sound resonates with a dull thud, solid. A few meters away, you strike again, and the echo is hollow, a warning sign that this course of stones has separated from the one below. Good ear, Thandai praises, then marks the spot with a slip of biodegradable tape. You continue along the corridor, each knock an exercise in listening to the wall's language. Between taps, you ask about the Guardian's origins. Thandai explains that after UNESCO's inscription, local communities were left with the responsibility of protecting the site. With tourism on the rise, some 50,000 visitors annually, the wear and tear on footpaths, walls, and midden pits became alarming. In response, a grassroots initiative emerged. Elders, youth groups, and museum staff teamed up to form patrols and maintenance crews. Your presence here is part of a global volunteer exchange, bringing expertise from abroad while centering local leadership. Your next assignment is clearing vegetation from the wall's base. Ivy, creeper vines, and grass roots have pushed between stones, threatening to pry them loose. Armed with small hand saws and steel brushes, you and a few other guardians work methodically to remove invasive growth. Whenever a root bundle slips free, a thin layer of soil follows. You brush it away, revealing a clean seam. It's meticulous, exhausting work. Sun beats down, sweat soaks your shirt, but you feel each cleared joint as a small victory for preservation. By mid-morning, you join a small group led by a botanist who specializes in indigenous plant management. She points out how some non-native species, introduced inadvertently by early settlers or later by colonial-era plantings, have become invasive. Pull up lantana, she instructs, indicating thorny shrubs encroaching on pathways. But leave the mopane saplings. Mopane trees are part of the original ecosystem and provide shade for weary visitors. You yank out a lantana root, careful to remove the entire tuber, and pile it aside for composting. Next, you visit the so-called science room, a small, semi-enclosed ruin near the Great Enclosure's southwest quadrant. Here, researchers study stone weathering, testing consolidation techniques, and monitoring microclimates. A climatologist measures temperature differentials with an infrared gun, inside the microclimate of the wall versus outside. You watch the digit on her device flicker. Inside the sheltered nook is several degrees cooler, a natural refuge for lichen, moss, and small invertebrates. The team has installed tiny data loggers to track humidity, moisture, and temperature over months, seeking patterns that predict accelerated decay. You help tie a logger to a discrete stake, careful not to damage the limestone slab. After a simple lunch of flatbread, dried fruit, and salty goat cheese eaten on a low stone bench, you gather for a workshop on visitor impact. A cultural anthropologist leads a discussion about balancing tourism with conservation. Every footprint counts, she warns, but so does every greeting. We want visitors to feel welcomed, not policed. Guardians share anecdotes. A French tourist who politely asked to sit on a wall without realizing she weakened the seam, or a school group that carved initials into a boulder before guides intervened. You add your own cautionary tale of a friend who unknowingly smeared sunscreen on a carved lintel, leaving greasy residue drawn into the stone's pores. The afternoon's main event is a demonstration of anastylosis, careful reassembly of collapsed stone courses. Thandai leads you to a collapsed section of the outermost wall, where slump blocks of granite lie jumbled. Each block bears a numbered tag, matching the conservator's log. The process is like solving a giant jigsaw puzzle. You lift a block, inspect its worn surfaces, and rotate it until it aligns with the matching indentation on the course above. When the fit is perfect, you slide it into place, its weight settling with a satisfying click. You step back. A small segment of wall straightens and rises, a testament to patient craftsmanship. During the work, A group of schoolchildren arrives on a heritage tour. They watch wide-eyed as you and other guardians lift stones. You crouch to their level and explain in simple Shona. These walls are like puzzles. We have to put each piece back where it belongs so they last longer. A girl tugs your sleeve and asks if she can help. Thandai offers her a soft brush to clear debris from the next block, and the child's grin lights up the courtyard. You realize that education is as vital to preservation as technical expertise. Sparking curiosity in young hearts may ensure these walls are guarded for centuries more. Later, you visit the conservation lab housed in a colonial-era building repurposed for artifact storage. Rows of metal racks hold pottery vessels wrapped in acid-free paper. You handle a smooth vessel painted with white chevrons and a red ochre band, one of the few recently repatriated fragments. Its surface bears tiny scratches from long-ago usage. A ceramic specialist shows you the careful consolidant applied to a hairline crack, invisible to the naked eye but crucial to prevent water infiltration. You clamp your hand gently around the vessel's neck, feeling the coolness of the lab and the thinness of the clay, making you appreciate the potter's skill even more. As afternoon light softens, you join a panel discussion under a grove of msasa trees. Local leaders, museum curators, and even a representative from UNESCO debate future strategies. Topics range from employing drone surveys to monitor wall movement, to expanding guided tours into lesser-known ruins nearby, to hosting annual Living History events celebrating Shona music and pottery. Someone suggests virtual reality walkthroughs so remote visitors can explore without environmental impact. Yet others worry that too much technology distances people from the tactile wonder of stacked stone. Historians in the group note that debates about authenticity versus accessibility echo earlier controversies. Some things never change. Your final task before dusk is to help install a new interpretive marker near the eastern gate. Instead of the old text, Great Zimbabwe, City of Stone, the new panel reads, Great Zimbabwe, built by the Shona over centuries. These walls hold the stories of ancestors, artisans, and traders. Your care today shapes their survival for tomorrow. You secure the marker in place with stainless steel bolts, then step back to read it under fading light. A breeze stirs, rustling tall grasses beyond the walls. You feel a sense of closure. The panel bridges past and present, ancient stones and modern guardianship, local stewardship and global respect. As nighttime falls, the guardians gather one last time around a small firelit circle in the great enclosure's heart. You share bowlfuls of roasted groundnuts and sweetened porridge, passing gourds of cold water. Thandai raises her cup in a quiet toast. To the stones, she says, may our hands be steady and our hearts humble. You lift your gourd and echo the sentiment in your mind. You realize that heritage preservation is not a one-time act but an ongoing promise. A covenant between those who came before, those who tend the present, and those who will come after. Lulled by the crackle of embers and the murmured voices around you, you settle on a smooth granitic slab. Stars glitter overhead through the enclosure's open sky. You close your eyes, imagining the gentle clip of mallets, the rustle of vines, and the patient hands that pieced these stones together centuries ago. And now, piece them back again. You drift into sleep, comforted by the knowledge that the guardians of heritage stand watch, ensuring these walls continue to whisper their ancient secrets for generations yet to come. You arrive at the ruins of Great Zimbabwe at dawn, but today the stones resonate not only with ancient echoes, but with the living pulse of modern culture. As you step through the northern gate, you pass under a fluttering Zimbabwean flag, whose red, yellow, green, black, and white stripes carry the abstract form of the Zimbabwe bird. You might not realize it, but this emblem, cast from one of the soapstone birds unearthed at the site, is so central to national identity that it appears on the country's flag, coat of arms, and currency notes. Mainstream historians credit Great Zimbabwe's stone-carved birds with inspiring these national symbols when Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980, forging a visual link between pre-colonial statecraft and modern sovereignty. You pause to trace your fingers along a modern interpretive plaque explaining that the soapstone birds, carved in the 14th century, likely represented battler eagles or mythical messengers between realms. It's a contentious point. Art historians still debate whether the birds depict real raptors or stylized spiritual guardians. Some argue the elongated beaks and abstract wings suggest a supernatural creature, while others insist their naturalism betrays an accurate ornithological reference. As you contemplate this scholarly impasse, you realize that these debates matter today, especially for artists drawing on the bird motif in contemporary works. Ahead of you, a group of school children from Masvingo City practice a dance under the watchful eye of a local choreographer. Their movements, hands tracing concentric circles as they step in a slow spiral, mirror the curved layouts of the great enclosure's walls. You learn that this stone spiral dance was created in 2015 by a collective of choreographers seeking to connect youth with their heritage. It's a quirky innovation. Ancient stone architecture turned into living, kinetic art. Only a handful of academic papers reference it, making it an obscure but vibrant testament to the site's continuing influence on performance culture. You wander into the on-site museum, where a fashion exhibit catches your eye. Mannequins wear flowing garments in greens and ochres, patterns inspired by the drip marks of ancient clay huts. The designer, a Harare-based couturier named Toriro Chikova, explained in an interview that she incorporates subtle chevron motifs, echoing Shona pottery, into modern streetwear. This extension of Great Zimbabwe's decorative lexicon demonstrates how ancient aesthetics are reimagined for 21st century wardrobes. Yet curators caution that such appropriations risk reducing sacred symbols to mere embellishments if not accompanied by proper cultural context. A debate that resonates among art historians studying cultural appropriation versus appreciation. Stepping outside, you notice the Parliament building of Zimbabwe on the skyline, its curved facade and stone-clad lower levels reputedly inspired by the concentric granite walls. Though the Parliament was built in the early 1990s, its architects openly acknowledged the influence of Great Zimbabwe's drystone technique and ring layouts. This architectural homage is both praised as a powerful symbol of national continuity and critiqued by preservationists who worry that mixing modern and ancient stonework may dilute the site's authenticity. Historians remain divided on whether such architectural homages constitute respectful tribute or risk trivializing heritage. You follow a path toward a courtyard where a graffiti mural spans a wall, vibrant colors depicting a mosaic of faces, wildlife, and soapstone birds. The artist, who goes by the moniker Ziva, meaning pool in Shona, painted it in 2018 as part of a community art festival. He describes his work as the people's story of Great Zimbabwe, blending real and imagined elements. Local farmers sharing beer with visiting traders, scholars bent over excavation trenches, and soapstone birds taking flight above the ruins. This unofficial mural reveals how grassroots creativity repurposes the stone's imagery into urban expressions, even as officials worry about unauthorized art defacing protected sites. Nearby, you stumble upon a small stall selling handcrafted soapstone bird replicas polished to a high sheen. The vendor, a young entrepreneur named Fungi, explains that each bird is carved using traditional chiseling methods passed down from his grandfather, a master sculptor from Bulawayo. You pick up a palm-sized bird and feel its weight, marveling that the same techniques used in the 14th century still produce exquisite carvings today. It's an obscure craft. Only a handful of workshops in Zimbabwe maintain the old whetstone and iron chisel approach, preferring modern power tools. You leave with a small bird, intrigued by the lineage of hands that shaped it. As midday heat settles in, you find a bench outside the on-site restaurant, where chefs serve plates of sadza, maize porridge, alongside a fusion stew of goat, peanut, and wild ginger. The menu's name, Echoes of the Stone Plate, pays homage to ancient stone grinding slabs found among the ruins. It's a culinary nod to heritage. Using local mushrooms and mopane worm protein, the restaurant insists on sourcing ingredients sustainably from surrounding communities. Food historians note that this farm-to-table approach parallels pre-colonial supply chains, where villagers harvested local plants and insects as both staples and delicacies. Yet some critics argue the price point, roughly $20 per meal, alienates local visitors, sparking debate over accessibility and the commercialization of cultural cuisine. You wander into a workshop space where a group of filmmakers screens a new short about Great Zimbabwe's legacy. The documentary is narrated in second-person voice, You trace your fingers over stones carved by hands centuries ago. You hear drum beats echoing in the night. The film blends archival footage with modern interviews, exploring how Great Zimbabwe's image shaped Pan-Africanist discourse in the 1960s. Scholars debate the film's interpretation. Some praise its evocative style, while others fault it for overemphasizing political symbolism at the expense of architectural nuance. Regardless, the screening draws an intimate crowd of locals and tourists alike, a testament to the enduring fascination with this ancient site. In the visitor center's gift shop, you notice a brightly colored mug emblazoned with stylized stone walls and the phrase, "Stay solid," beneath a tiny soapstone bird. It's marketed as a motivational slogan, but you chuckle at the double meaning. The walls of Great Zimbabwe remain solid after centuries, and you're reminded to hold firm in your own life. Such playful appropriations, ranging from phone cases to tote bags, spark discussion among cultural commentators. At what point does merchandise become cultural spectacle rather than meaningful homage? Historians are still debating the ethics of tourist commodification versus community empowerment through heritage tourism. A local NGO, Heritage Hands, has set up a pop-up market near the ruins, showcasing crafts and performances by artisans from nearby villages. You watch as drum troops perform mbira-infused fusion jazz in open stalls, the mellow lamellophone blending with saxophone riffs. The collective's founder explains that they bring musicians, weavers, and carvers to the site to sustain livelihoods tied to heritage. This community-based model is cited in rare NGO reports as a best practice for linking conservation with economic development, though funding remains precarious and dependent on donor cycles. You step into a lecture hall carved from a rehabilitated colonial storage building, where an academic conference on heritage and identity is underway. Panelists include a Shona oral historian, an art curator from Johannesburg, and a diaspora scholar from London. They discuss how Great Zimbabwe's narrative has been mobilized in politics, used by both ZANU-PF and opposition parties to assert legitimacy. One speaker notes that Mugabe's regime appropriated the Zimbabwe bird to symbolize revolutionary continuity, while critics co-opted the same symbol as an emblem of contested national memory. Historians continue to debate how far heritage sites can remain apolitical when their imagery is weaponized in electoral campaigns. After the conference, you walk through a thicket of granite boulders on the hilltop, where a silent art installation catches your eye. 50 small white ceramic bowls, each holding a handful of native seeds, millet, sorghum, cowpea, are arranged in the pattern of the soapstone bird's outstretched wings. The artist, a multimedia sculptor named Tendai, explains it as a gesture toward agricultural resilience and ancestral knowledge. Few have written about this ephemeral work in academic journals, making it one of the site's most obscure but powerful modern rituals. Approaching the western gate, you pass a group of university students mapping GPS waypoints. They're part of a citizen science project tracking erosion patterns along the walls. Each student carries a tablet, documenting spider webs between stones and noting microclimates that foster lichen growth. Conservationists praise this initiative as a rare example of open-source heritage data collection, though some officials worry about privacy and potential vandalism if precise coordinates become public. The tension between transparency and protection remains a subject of technical debate among digital heritage specialists. You linger at the crest of the hill as the sun dips low. The sky turns a deep orange. You step through the northern gate at first light, greeting the flagstones that have borne the souls of generations, now punctuated by scuffed footprints from selfie stick wielders and guided groups. Already, you spot a line of minibuses idling on the dusty access road, their engines cooling from the overnight drive. Tourism here is a lifeline. Guides earn tips, craftspeople sell soapstone birds by the dozen, and local markets buzz with vendors hawking woven baskets and beaded jewelry. Mainstream economic reports credit heritage tourism with contributing over 10% of Masvingo province's annual income, supporting schools, clinics, and road repairs. Yet the same visitors who bolster livelihoods also nibble at the edges of preservation. You watch as a family pauses to snap photos inside the great enclosure, boots brushing against low stones meant to be off-limits. A tour leader's voice drifts through a megaphone. Please stay on the path. though the path itself is thinning under constant foot traffic. Archaeologists note that even managed walkways require periodic reinforcement. Granite dust must be swept back into seams to offset erosion from wind, rain, and the friction of countless sandals. It's a subtle form of damage. Layers of microabrasion you only perceive when you crouch to examine a once pristine joint now worn smooth. You thread your way past a kiosk offering bottled water and branded caps emblazoned with the site's logo. The kiosk's profits flow into a community trust, funding youth-led patrols that monitor wall stability and guide etiquette. A quirky local fact: the trust also sponsors an annual Stone Whisperer contest, where children compete to recite oral histories with the fewest factual errors. Winners receive scholarships to university, ensuring that knowledge of Shona heritage endures. Yet the contest depends on visitors buying raffle tickets. Another sign that cultural preservation here walks hand in hand with commerce. At the base of the outermost wall, you join a guided group led by a young woman named Tapawa, whose enthusiasm feels genuine despite her scripted lines. She gestures toward a hairline crack and explains how rainwater can seep into mortar-less seams, expanding by night frost and contracting by morning heat. Scholars have long debated whether installing discrete drainage channels is a welcome intervention or an intrusion into the original design. Some conservationists argue that discrete PVC weep holes compromise authenticity, while others insist that without them, key wall sections will weaken and collapse. You can see both sides play out in real time. Tourists marvel at the stone curves, unaware that hidden pipes may lie behind adjacent bush. You step aside to let a school group pass, toes encased in rental boots stamped heritage trail. Their chatter echoes off granite, a youthful counterpoint to the solemn hush you sometimes crave. You recall that in the early 2000s, authorities banned large tour groups to protect fragile areas, only to rescind the rule when visitor numbers plunged and local incomes dipped dangerously. It's a cycle. Too many visitors erode the stones. Too few devastate livelihoods. Historians still debate whether heritage sites can ever find true equilibrium between access and conservation. Moving inland, you pass a cluster of craft stalls where artisans carve miniature wall segments from soapstone scraps. Each replica sells for around $5, and buyers, mostly foreign tourists, clutch them like talismans. The income supports family workshops, yet carving tiny walls accelerates stone removal from the quarry, which in turn depletes the same resource the main site depends upon. You wonder whether those small birds and wall models will someday be valued as historical artifacts themselves, relics of an era when souvenir culture collided with ancient craftsmanship. A few meters on, you encounter a makeshift shrine where a local guide has placed fresh maize cobs and bottles of beer as offerings. Visitors stop to take photos, some tossing coins into the hollow at the shrine's center. It's an unofficial ritual, a fusion of Shona ancestor veneration and tourist showmanship. Anthropologists note that such roadside shrines, once hidden deep in the bush, are now curated photo ops, blurring the line between spirituality and spectacle. You hesitate to take a picture. Is it cultural documentation or just more fuel for the site's commodification? You follow a narrow trail up to a viewpoint overlooking the great enclosure. There, a battery-powered rickshaw waits to ferry elderly visitors and those with mobility challenges, a gesture toward inclusivity. Few realize the rickshaw's wheels press into soft patches of earth, compacting soils that archaeobotanists study to reconstruct past vegetation patterns. This delicate soil stratigraphy may contain pollen grains that reveal centuries-old climate data. Conservationists debate whether to ban wheeled vehicles entirely or reroute them onto plastic boardwalks that could themselves disrupt microhabitats. By midday, heat hangs heavy, and you seek shade beneath a grove of fever trees where a heritage cafe serves local dishes. You order a plate of roasted goat skewers and porridge infused with baobab powder, delights that draw on indigenous ingredients. The cafe's slogan, "Taste the past," feels apt but also a little unsettling. Can you really consume heritage? Food critics praise the menu's authenticity, but public health researchers worry about hygiene standards in an open-air setting. They argue for stainless steel tables and hand-washing stations, while cultural purists fear industrial fixtures will clash with the site's rustic aesthetic. You stroll past a row of interpretive signs recently updated by UNESCO consultants. Each panel includes Braille translations and QR codes linking to audio tours in 5 languages. An impressive nod toward accessibility and digital engagement. Yet some historians dismiss QR use as too modern, arguing that scanning codes distracts visitors from tactile engagement with the stones themselves. Others champion the digital shift, insisting that augmented reality overlays can reconstruct ancient buildings layer by layer, allowing remote visitors to experience Great Zimbabwe without adding foot traffic. The debate rages among site managers, tech developers, and heritage scholars. In the afternoon lull, a documentary filmmaker arrives with a drone to capture aerial footage of the concentric walls. You watch the rotors hum overhead, and your heart skips. UNESCO guidelines prohibit drones except under strict permits, to protect nesting birds and privacy. The pilot claims he has a permit, but you notice no signage or safety wardens. Some environmentalists warn that unregulated drone flights can stress raptors and disrupt microclimates around the cliffs. Yet filmmakers argue that striking aerial shots raise global awareness and can boost visitor numbers, and thus funding for preservation. Further along, you pass a volunteer workshop where expatriate archaeologists teach local youths to catalog shards and map broken walls. Their energy is inspiring. Teenagers learn GIS mapping and digital archiving, skills that promise future careers. But you overhear a visiting academic quip that community archaeology often amounts to cheap labor, subsidizing foreign-led projects. It echoes an old critique. Does heritage tourism empower locals or exploit them as cheap guides and cleaning crews? You reflect on your own role, visitor, participant, critic, wondering what true equity would look like. As afternoon shadows lengthen, you return to the great enclosure for a late guided session. The group number has dwindled, some tourists left hours ago, leaving only a handful of curious souls. Their guide dims his voice to a whisper, as though honoring the stones. You listen to stories of cattle negotiations, royal ceremonies, and whispered ghost tales. Tales the guide learned from elders, not colonial textbooks. It feels restorative after the bustle of peak hours, a reminder that intimate encounters still exist amid the commerce. By sunset, you join a small circle of local entrepreneurs planning a heritage and wine event. A twilight wine tasting on the terrace, pairing local varietals with heirloom maize snacks. Wine influencers from Harare are scheduled to post live feeds, promising media coverage and Instagram buzz. To you, it sounds like a charming fusion, though some conservationists worry about attracting crowds after hours, raising noise levels and requiring nighttime lighting that could disturb nocturnal wildlife. The event planners insist on LED lanterns and capped attendance to minimize impact, but the tension between publicity and preservation remains palpable. As night falls, you make your way to the edge of the great enclosure, where a small amphitheater hosts a performance of Stone Echoes, a play that reenacts builder spirits negotiating the foundations of the walls. Actors painted in ochre weave between stone pillars as drums signal each act. The audience, tourists, villagers, and expatriates, sits on temporary benches. It's a captivating finale, art born of commerce, reminding everyone that these stones still speak. Yet you wonder whether the bench's metal legs press too deeply into the earth, or whether stray bits of paint from costumes will flake onto the stones. When the final drumbeats fade, you linger in the glow of visiting lanterns. The walls stand silent but sturdy, silhouettes against the starry sky. You recall the day's contradictions, the livelihoods boosted by visitors. You step into the morning light of Great Zimbabwe, the sun gilding the concentric granite rings as if nature itself is underlining their significance. Today, you're not here to clear vines or guide tourists. You're here to eavesdrop on the world's leading experts as they spar over everything from roof heights to trade networks. Welcome to the academic arena at Great Zimbabwe, where the stones themselves seem to shift when scholars aren't looking. As you move among the inner walls, you spot a cluster of folding chairs arranged in a semicircle, each occupied by an earnest face peering at laptops and scribbled notes. A hastily tacked-up banner reads, 14th Annual Symposium on Great Zimbabwe Studies. You settle onto a warm slab of granite and sip from your gourd of milky sorghum beer, bracing for a day of thought-provoking contention. The session opens with a presentation by Dr. Amina Chirwa, whose research focuses on the wall's purpose. You listen as she argues that the concentric stone rings weren't defensive barriers at all, but platforms for ritual performance. Staged processions at solstices, where dancers in ochre-painted masks enacted cosmic dramas. Mainstream archaeology credits Great Zimbabwe with having ceremonial precincts, but Chirwa pushes further. She proposes that each ring corresponds to a stage in the Shona creation myth, a kind of stone mandala grounded in local cosmology. Her argument rests on ethnographic parallels with modern rainmaking ceremonies. You nod, intrigued by the idea of walls as theater, though you wonder how practical it is to perform elaborate rituals on slippery granite tiers. Next up is Professor Johan van der Merwe, who stands to contest Chirwa's stone mandala theory. He's a specialist in hydraulic engineering of ancient sites, and he's fixated on tiny drainage scuppers cut into the walls. These slits, he insists, pointing at a photograph on the screen, are not vents for spectators. They are calculated outlets for runoff, preventing base undermining during heavy rains. He demonstrates hydrological models showing how thousands of liters of stormwater would otherwise erode the foundations. According to van der Merwe, the builder's primary priority was structural integrity, not ritual choreography. You scribble performance versus plumbing? In your notebook, amused at how each zoomed-in detail can spawn entire research careers. During the coffee break, you overhear two grad students in the corner arguing over builder identities. One, wearing a university sweatshirt, maintains that Great Zimbabwe's true progenitors were elites from Mapungubwe to the south, migrating northward after their own capital declined. He cites stylistic parallels between soapstone birds found at both sites. The other student counters that stylistic convergence is a poor indicator of population movement. She points to radiocarbon dates showing overlapping occupation periods, suggesting independent development rather than mass migration. You catch the terms gradual diffusion and punctuated migration, flung back and forth like intellectual dodgeballs. Back in the symposium tent, Dr. David Riley takes the floor. His topic is chronology. Did Great Zimbabwe rise in discrete building phases or through continuous expansion? He displays a timeline where he divides construction into 3 stages. Early enclosure, 1100 to 1250 CE. Great enclosure, 1250 to 1350 CE. And final decline, 1350 to 1450 CE. Many textbooks adopt this tripartite model. Yet Riley questions the neatness of these boundaries, arguing that recent Bayesian analysis of radiocarbon samples suggests overlap. Ambitious masons revisiting earlier walls while new sections were still underway. Construction was more like a spider web than a neatly stacked cake. He quips, drawing laughter. You imagine the masons weaving stone courses in and around each other, a messy but dynamic building process. Lunch brings grilled goat skewers to the courtyard stone tables, and you find yourself seated next to an art historian who specializes in soapstone sculptures. She leans close and lowers her voice. Most people assume the Zimbabwe birds represent battler eagles, she confides, but I found a cluster of oral accounts pointing to the fish eagle, a water-associated spirit in Shona belief. You take a bite and nearly choke. What starts as a light-hearted chat about feathered motifs turns into a debate over ornithological symbolism. Quirky fact: eagle talons are still used in local divination rituals, linking birds, stone carvings, and future-telling in one tangled tradition. The afternoon session dives into economic debates. Dr. Farai Moyo argues that cattle, not gold or ivory, drove the site's prosperity. He presents herd inventories from 14th century middens showing tens of thousands of cattle bones. According to him, trading ivory was too risky. Elephants migrate, making supply fickle, so the stone walls primarily enclosed vast livestock pens. Forget Solomon's ivory, think local hide, he urges, referencing a set of oxhide impressions found on a plaster fragment. You glance at the stacked enclosures, picturing them as grand cattle corrals rather than regal courtyards. Historians are still debating whether Great Zimbabwe functioned more as a pastoral capital or a mining entrepot. By contrast, Dr. Leila Mahundi champions the gold and ivory thesis. She unveils a cache of hammered gold granules and elliptical ivory beads recovered in salvage digs under collapsing walls. The density of exotic objects in the elite precinct suggests a more complex trade network than simple cattle barter, she says. She points to isotopic analyses indicating ivory sourced from distant Zambezi and Luangwa elephants. Mahundi contends that ivory merchants were the real architects of that network, their wealth underpinning the construction. You sip your porridge and ponder the possibility that Great Zimbabwe's walls were built on a foundation of tusks and nuggets more than herd hides. As shadows lengthen, the debate shifts to gender roles. Dr. Namfundo Zulu posits that women oversaw soapstone carving and bead-making workshops within the inner enclosures. She bases this on where patterns on grinding stones and a paucity of male burials in the artisan quarters. Women were the economic linchpins, she asserts, managing crafts that fueled both ritual and commerce. Dr. Peter Mbengo challenges her to distinguish women's handiwork from men's. After all, tools leave little sex-specific signature. He reminds the audience that male burials could have occurred off-site in ancestral shrines now lost to erosion. Historians are still debating whether gender specialization at Great Zimbabwe mirrored other African kingdoms or followed a unique Shona pattern. The penultimate panel grapples with restoration ethics. One conservator argues passionately for anastylosis, re-erecting fallen stones to recapture the wall's full height. Another warns against over-restoration, cautioning that rebuilding may erase centuries of weathering that tell their own story. They disagree over whether to use traditional pecking tools during restoration or modern masonry methods. You watch as they brandish photos of restored walls gleaming in sunlight, then rippling with moss and lichen in other pictures. It's architecture versus archaeology, preservation versus authenticity, a debate that resonates at heritage sites worldwide. Finally, the symposium ends with an open-floor session titled Future Directions. Questions range from drone mapping for non-invasive surveys to virtual reality reconstructions for remote education. Someone raises the issue of climate change. Will increased rainfall intensity threaten wall stability? Another asks about intangible heritage. Should we record local songs and dances as part of the site's living legacy? A young student rises to propose a multidisciplinary digital archive that merges 3D scans, oral histories, and environmental data. The proposal draws enthusiastic nods but also caution. Can technology outpace the very communities it's meant to serve? As the tent breaks down around you, you linger to watch the scholars file away, their laptops tucked under arms, maps rolled up like scrolls. The sun dips toward the horizon, painting the walls in molten gold. You realize that the debates aren't merely academic. They shape funding for conservation, inform tourist brochures, and influence how descendants see their own heritage. Each controversy leaves its mark on the stones as surely as water and wind. You wander back toward the great enclosure, alone now, feeling the weight of 1,000 disagreements in your mind. You lean against a cool granite slab and close your eyes, hearing the echoes of today's arguments. Walls as ritual stages or stone water systems, cattle cities or ivory hubs, men's work or women's craft, restored heights or weathered patina. Historians are still debating every one of these questions, perhaps because the stones themselves refuse to give simple answers. When you finally rise to leave, you pause at the gate and place a hand on the lintel, as if pledging allegiance to the living conversation these ruins inspire. You take a deep breath of evening air scented with sage and distant smoke, grateful that you've witnessed the vibrant life of ideas play out among the stones. And as you step back onto the red soil path, you know this won't be the last debate. Great Zimbabwe. You arrive at the ruins just after first light, the air crisp with promise and faintly scented by winter blooms. As you step onto the winding ramparts, you notice small sensor nodes, barely larger than pebbles, embedded between cracks in the granite. These devices measure moisture levels, temperature shifts, and even subtle vibrations, relaying data to a cloud dashboard monitored by conservators half a world away. It's a far cry from the human watchers perched here in centuries past, yet it's in service of the same goal, listening to the stones. You pause to recall the grand arc of Great Zimbabwe's history. Mainstream archaeologists date its founding to around 1100 CE, with expansions through the 14th century and gradual decline by 1450 CE. In 1986, UNESCO recognized it as a World Heritage Site, cementing its status as a symbol of pre-colonial African achievement. These dates and designations guide every decision about how to steward the site into the future. Yet the future is a moving target. You watch as a sudden thunderstorm sweeps across the plain, rain hammering the walls in torrents. Stormwater cascades over limestone ledge drainage channels. Modern interventions installed after studies showed unmitigated downpours could undermine foundations. Some engineers champion deeper French drains. Others warn that plastic piping will clash with the site's authenticity. The debate persists. Is it better to preserve the stones as they were, or adapt them with hidden modern safeguards? After the storm, you slip off your boots and wade through shallow puddles in the courtyard. A conservator kneels to apply a lime-based consolidant to a chipped corner, a traditional material revived after chemists discovered that crushed snail shell ash, long used by medieval potters, improves adhesion and breathability. This quirky revival of an ancient recipe speaks to the power of local knowledge. Yet some restoration purists insist on using only inert synthetic resins. Scholars are still debating which choice will best balance longevity with historical integrity. At midday, you meet a cohort of students from Masvingo University, each clutching tablets loaded with an augmented reality app. Point your device at a cluster of fallen stones, and your screen reconstructs original wall heights and tower placements. It's exhilarating to see medieval courtyards come alive in 3D, but you wonder if visitors will spend more time staring at screens than feeling the grit of granite under their palms. Heritage professionals argue whether AR deepens engagement or distracts from embodied experience. Later, you join a drone mapping team that sweeps overhead in precise grids, capturing high-resolution imagery to track microerosion. Ornithologists protest, noting that drone noise disrupts nesting battler eagles, birds once immortalized in soapstone carvings here. You recognize the conundrum. Is the sacrifice of a few raptors' calm justified by the gains in preservation data? Environmental ethicists and tech advocates continue to spar over drone protocols at heritage sites worldwide. By afternoon, the sun breaks through again, and you wander into a protective canopy erected over a fragile wall segment. Steel scaffolding holds a translucent roof, installed to shield the stones from ultraviolet degradation and acid rain. Some visitors complain that the shelter mars the romantic vista, yet without it, the outer courses would crumble within a few decades. International guidelines recommend minimum intervention, but in practice, balancing visibility and protection demands continuous renegotiation. A small goat herd grazes beyond the walls, managed by local youth groups contracted for vegetation control. Their goats clear invasive shrubs, reducing root damage, yet conservationists caution that overgrazing can compact soils and accelerate erosion. It's another example of a fine line. Goats as guardians or goats as unwitting vandals. Studies are underway to monitor soil compaction under hoofprints, but the real verdict will emerge only years from now. As evening approaches, you join a symposium under the stars. A panel of geologists, climatologists, and archaeologists debates projections. Will future droughts cause salt crystallization deep within the stone pores? Can we breed lichen-resistant granite coatings? One researcher presents experimental, self-healing biomortars seeded with bacteria that precipitate calcium carbonate, but critics fear unintended ecological consequences. The huddle of experts concedes that every new technology brings its own risks. After the session, you walk the quiet pathways with a local guide who points out newly installed RFID tags, tiny chips affixed behind stones to create a digital inventory. Each tag carries GPS coordinates, a 3D scan reference, and a maintenance history. It's an unprecedented administrative achievement, but skeptics warn that RFID dependence is vulnerable to tech obsolescence. What happens if chips fail or readers become unsupported? The long-term digital stewardship of heritage sites is an emerging field of contention. Night falls and you climb to the highest rampart. Below, the modern village lights of Masvingo twinkle in the distance. Tourism now supports nearly 1 in 4 families in the region, yet over-tourism remains a specter. 100,000 annual visitors could soon become 250,000 if new marketing campaigns succeed. Community leaders discuss dynamic ticket pricing, lower rates for locals, premium fees for foreign visitors, to balance revenue and access. Economists and ethicists debate the fairness of tiered pricing, but something must give. Unchecked crowds will erode the very seams they come to admire. You press your palm against a cool block of granite and imagine the builders of old, their voices long silent. Today's technologies and policies may feel alien to them, yet they share the same impulse, to ensure these walls endure. You realize that preservation is not a singular act but a perpetual negotiation between past and future, between human hands and natural forces, between local stewards and global stakeholders. Before you leave, you participate in a short ceremony led by village elders and site managers. You place a small offering, a handful of millet, at the base of the eastern gate, accompanied by pouring a few drops of water harvested from a solar-powered pump. The gesture bridges ancient libation rituals with modern sustainability practices. A scholar notes wryly that in 50 years, anthropologists will debate whether this was a reclamation of ancestral rights or a savvy PR move. As you step back onto the dusty path leading away, you carry with you the sounds of debate. Rainwater running through drains, sensor beeps, goats bleating, and distant drumbeats from a youth drum circle. The echoes of tomorrow are already here, whispering promises and warnings. You walk forward with humility, knowing that every choice you make today shapes the ruin's fate centuries hence. Now, as your journey draws to a gentle close, feel the weariness in your shoulders melt away. Let each breath drift slowly, like a soft breeze sliding over complex stone curves. Imagine the walls behind you dissolving into the hush of starlight, each block dissolving into dreams. Your heartbeat slows, matching the ancient rhythms inscribed in granite. Rest easy, knowing that the stones you walked upon will rest, too, cradled by caring hands across generations. Every sensor hum, whispered debate, and pilgrim's footstep is but a fleeting moment in the vast expanse of time. Let your thoughts untether from the day's questions and drift toward warmth. The scent of wood smoke curling through open windows, the murmur of distant laughter, the promise of soft blankets and welcoming pillows. Allow your mind to float free, like dust motes caught in a